Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to Defense Diaries or The Docket, presented to you by Defense Diaries, where this is our continuing coverage of Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy investigation. Did I fuck that up, babe? Seems all butchered.
I think it's Welcome to Buried, presented by Defense Diaries.
Okay, I'll start it again.
I don't know.
Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy investigation, brought to you by Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and this is episode 3 of our listening party / Q&A, who I am, as always, joined by my beautiful and brilliant co-host, Allie. What's up, girl?
Hey, babe. Hey, all. So just for you audio-only people out there, just remember this is a live episode, and we will have questions from our live listeners.
Indeed, we will. So we've been trying to figure out, because I know that we have some hearing impaired people that occasionally like to pop in and enjoy following along with us. We cannot figure out on Apple Podcasts how to get it so that the transcript, which is what you're seeing in front of you, will follow along as it's progressing, as it does on my phone. So I guess I'm just going to manually stop it, or I'm going to manually scroll along as we're listening to the podcast. And then when Allie signals me that she wants me to stop because she wants to ask something, or if I want to stop to put, say something, then I'll stop where it is. So unfortunately, unless somebody in the chat knows how to.
I'll just say this, Bob. This morning, I was listening to one of our friends' podcasts, True Crime Bullshit, and it was not letting me do that, which it usually does, where it's highlighting it and I press it and I'm like, what's going on? It was making me press and hold and then click play. So
Even on your phone?
Updated on my phone. Yeah, maybe they updated the.
That's weird. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. So, yeah, Spotify definitely does the auto transcript thing, but Allie tried to do that on the mobile app, right? So we don't know if it's doing it on. We don't know if it's doing it on the Mac. So well, whatever. We'll work around it. We'll do it manually so that y'all can at least see what it's saying, if you can read that, because I can't really blow it up either. If I make the screen larger, then it moves the whole transcript over to the side and it looks weird. So, all right. So there's some of our tech wizardry for you. Us just not knowing what the fuck we're doing ever. So we will power through. And I think this will be a very enjoyable episode either way. Allie always tells me that this particular episode is probably her favorite out of all of them.
No, it's one of the top. It's this one, and then it's the episodes, every episode that starts with the story of one of the victims. Those are my absolute favorites.
Yeah, those are good ones. All right. So you guys ready to rock and roll on this thing? So this is going to have ads because if we can't do it, maybe what we do is you play it on Patreon so we don't have the ads, but I keep this up. Well, that won't
Yeah,
work.
that will work.
That won't work
What do you mean?
because
It'll
you have to share
absolutely
the
work.
Patreon. Like we can't both share something.
Oh, right, that won't work.
Okay. All right. So we'll just do it this way.
You can press and hold, so at least you start on the "Hi, I'm Linda," but I think you have it booted up, so you should
Yeah,
be
I've got it
oh.
booted up, so it should start. So if you guys saw my Twitter post, it was this episode where I had dug enough into the investigation in terms of kind of the police paperwork in the file to start to really understand just.
I don't want you to explain the episode before we start because it has a certain impact before you realize what you're
I'm not
doing.
going to talk about any of that stuff.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. But this is well. Let me just leave it this way. This is where I really started to, at this point in time, because this is a real time investigation, to where I started to have an understanding of, and I'll put it this way, Chicago police's involvement or non-involvement in terms of the investigation. So that doesn't give them shit. Come on. Relax. All right, you guys ready? Let's fire this thing up. Allie, just give me like some kind of sign.
I've decided it's like the Bullwinkle tongue out. I don't know.
Oh, that's pretty good. Does that hurt your shoulder? So one other note that I feel you guys deserve to know. Allie is having major surgery tomorrow at 7 in the morning. We got to get up at 5. I got to get her over to the hospital. She is getting a absolutely destroyed, torn rotator cuff and bicep fixed, repaired, so that she's not in constant agony anymore. And I don't know when she's going to be able to hang with us for a minute. I think she's going to be in a lot of pain. She's got a incredibly high pain threshold, but I think this is probably one of those things where even her toughness might be overcome by the pain and or whatever pain medication they give you. So
I still feel like tomorrow I'll still be feeling like the blocker from the surgery, so I should be, like, good to go. It's once that once the blocker from the surgery starts to wear off, but all that being said, I'll see you when I see you, and if I don't, I miss you.
okay,
Not you,
that's
babe, because 'cause I'll be seeing you.
yeah, I'll be taking care of you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll be seeing me plenty. Probably too much for your own liking. All right, you guys ready? Let's fire this thing up. It fires. It starts right in. This is exactly how the episode starts. And again, we're always looking at the downloads. If you guys are listening, if you love it, please let other people know. You guys are our secret weapon. You guys let it be known to the world that this is an amazing podcast. And I know a lot of you are. I see you. I acknowledge you always on Twitter because I'm so grateful. But if you're not on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, whatever socials you're on, just let people know. Just be like, hey, you like true crime, you're probably going to dig this. It's super helpful. All right, let's go.
And a friend of mine moved out
Nope.
to Des Plaines.
What?
And introducing the new Sleep Score.
Oh, boy.
Apple Watch. iPhone 11
That's
for
it.
later
That's
required.
Put your mouse on high. All right.
Hi, I'm Linda. And a friend of mine moved out to Des Plaines. And I was close to Christmas. I wanted to see her before the holidays. And my uncle happened to live at a place called the Oasis Trailer Park. And they moved just a few short blocks from there. So I was a little bit familiar with the area. But I went out to visit my friend, and she
can't do anything.
She was going to a new high school. I think it was called Maine West. And she said, "Oh, Linda, there's this guy. He's a fox," as they said in the 70s, And she's a nice girl, but, she wasn't a cheerleader. But I said, okay, she works at this, at the pharmacy over here. Let's go take a walk, because neither of us were driving at the time. So we took a walk. It was a little bit after dinner time, and it was cold, I remember. And we walked into this pharmacy, and we walked up, and she says, "I want you to meet my friend." I don't remember if she called him Bob or Rob, but I remember the word name Peace, because I thought that was kind of close to Judas Priest in my head. I just remember that. But he was a good-looking guy, and not somebody that you would see the two of them together. And the only reason that means, anything to me in my memory here is because of what happened afterwards. So she introduces me to the guy, and he was cool. I don't remember exactly the words we exchanged, but what stuck out in my head was, here was my friend who was, my friend was nice, but she's kind of gangly, very plain, and here's this good-looking guy, and he was so nice to her. Some guys can be like, blow off, like, yeah, whatever, this chick likes me or whatever. But he was so kind and very accommodating. And he didn't have a lot of time, but he spoke to her and said to me, nice to meet you. And it was a very short exchange, but he made an impact because I just thought, wow, that guy's really cool. He's good looking, but he was so nice to my friend. Because he could have been a bully, and he wasn't. He looked like the captain of the football team kind of guy. Not that big built, but just that kind of guy. And he had to excuse himself because he had to get back to work. But he said, it was very nice meeting you. I said, yeah, nice meeting you. And my friend turned to me, and she's like, oh, my God. You see what I mean? I went, yes, I see what you mean. He's a good-looking guy. And we left. And I just recall the next day, it's almost like a neighborhood thing where people were going door to door, like they couldn't find this guy. It was the guy that we met at the pharmacy. Bob Peace. And I just remember my friend was crying. She was so upset. She's like ready to go and look and try to find him. And but it made an impact on me because that he, eventually we found out succumbed to this whole thing. I remember his kindness, that he was kind to my friend, and that stayed with me all these years.
The voice you just heard is that of a woman named Linda, who 40 years after the fact still is impacted by the death of Rob Peast. I didn't track Linda down to do an interview. She reached out to me after hearing about this podcast, and she did so because of who Rob Peast was, and it still resonates with her. She simply wanted to share a fleeting moment of her life that has stuck with her all of these years. This is a perfect example of the long-reaching, seemingly never-ending ramifications of the horrors that Gacy perpetrated, not only on his victims, but on their mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, lovers, fellow students, coworkers, and even mere acquaintances. Their loss has been felt in numbers that are nearly impossible to quantify, but they are vast. 6 of Gacy's victims still, after all of these years, have...
So I text you, pause it vast. I thought you saw it because it said red.
What?
I text you, pause it vast I thought you saw it because it said red.
What said red?
My text said red.
What's that?
So you have your read receipts on.
Oh.
All right. Darren's going to have to do some work here for the episode conversion. So, I always was just so moved by this woman's story. I mean, you put it into words that I are so much better than obviously what I'm about to put it in. But, it's like such a little thing that this woman felt such an impact that this guy, was just like a nice guy because in her mind, he was being polite and sweet to a girl that he would never have any romantic interest in. And just like she said, I mean, she said it perfectly as well in her own, in her way. And like his kindness struck her and she that stuck with her all this time. And I really thought it was a great addition to the story, but can you tell us, was that the voicemail that she left? Was that separately recorded? How did you guys do that?
So I think after episode 1 had dropped, and again, I did this as an indie pod. We decided that, I wasn't going to go try to sell it to Wondery or something like that. So after 1 drops, like really the only kind of publicity that I was able to garner prior to it coming out was I was able to get WGN in Chicago interested in coming out to our law office and kind of doing an interview with me and, kind of promoting the podcast coming out, which again, at that point, I didn't know exactly how it was going to go, but I had the tapes, that was a hook for them. So they came out, they did a bunch of B-roll stuff. They did the interview with me at our office. So there was some promotion locally here in Chicago when the podcast dropped. So we got, and when we were watching the numbers as we dropped the first episode, we were kind of able to narrow down where our listeners were. Obviously, a majority of them were from the Chicagoland area, and Linda happened to be one of those people. Now, we had left our email address or ways to contact us in multiple places. So Linda first emails me and she's like, hey, my name's Linda and I have a story about Rob Peace that, I'd like to share if you'd like to hear it. And I was like, absolutely. I wanted to hear every story that everybody that reached out to us had, no matter what it was involving, whether it was victims, whether it was, their families being involved with the case somehow. There's so much connective tissue to that case in this city that, I fully expected to get bombarded with emails and messages from people that were saying, hey, I've got a story. Do you want to hear it? So I then called Linda instead of communicating with her via email. I'm a big phone guy. Like I don't like texting. I don't like emailing people. There's no context in that shit. I like to talk to people. So I hit her up and she told me the story. I said, tell me the story. And she did. And I thought it was moving for all the reasons that you just said, babe. I felt like it was important because, one of the things that I'm always trying to focus on is that the victims and the survivors of victims extends way beyond just family. It's felt by a community at large. It's felt, oftentimes it could be felt by the world. Anybody that person had any kind of impact on their life, whether it be big or small, is feeling that in some way. And for me, this felt like a perfect way to segue into the episode that I knew was going to be revolving around Rob Peace pretty much exclusively. As we get to the end of the episode, you'll see that I take a turn, but it's still related to Rob, in a very roundabout way. So yeah, I just felt that it was a wonderful way to tribute Rob Peace and and the people that loved him so very much in terms of their loss, which was again was a primary focus for us in the podcast. And I remember listening. I had the same response now listening to it when she's telling the story, where she's kind of like making these like little backhanded comments about her friend. She's no cheerleader. She's okay looking. Like where she's basically saying that she never would have had a shot with Rob because she would be out kicking her coverage as far as looks go in her estimation. But that's what stuck with her. The fact that her friend had a crush on this super cute guy who was still a gentleman at all times and was super responsive and didn't give that vibe of like, just being some kind of stuck up jerk high school kid, which, a lot of guys are like at that age because, they don't know how to be a human being yet. So all those things resonated with me and it checked out as far as, me vetting it and was it real? Because that was always something that we had to do with anybody that was calling in, because as we progress through the podcast, you're going to find that there are many people that we did this with that had very varying tales of Gacy and how Gacy, the story, impacted their life in different types of ways. And we always had to vet that. We didn't want to be putting anything out there that was bullshit. It was very important for us to be just facts. It's, when we started the podcast, it was just facts. It's still just facts now, and it always will be just facts on this thing. So yeah, the bottom line is it was just a really, I thought, apropos and touching way to, start the Rob Piest episode.
All right, let's resume.
All right.
I don't know how you're going to get right back to the beginning of that sentence. I don't think you can.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll do it. I'll do it like this.
Friends, lover, tears. This is a perfect example of the long-reaching, seemingly never-ending ramifications of the horrors that Gacy perpetrated, not only on his victims, but on their mothers, fathers, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, lovers, fellow students, coworkers, and even mere acquaintances. Their loss has been felt in numbers that are nearly impossible to quantify, but they are vast. 6 of Gacy's victims still, after all of these years, have never been identified. All of these young men had people that loved and cared about them. And I am certain that someone out there knows of a boy that went missing in the Chicago area between 72 and 78, and maybe even in other cities that Gacy traveled to during the same time frame. If you are one of those people and you catch wind of this podcast, reach out to us at insider@defensediaries.com, because the victims, every single one of them, deserves to be known.
Sam said I could have killed 100 people. How do I know I didn't kill 100 people? How did I know I did some just while I was traveling? It's possible, but I don't recall if I did any stalking or traveling. Like if I get done with the job at night, I went around looking for something like that.
Before we jump in, it's important for you, the listener, to know what resources I'm using to create this podcast. And what they are the following: the Gacy tapes, of course, trial transcripts, the police investigation file, copies of motions that were filed by both the defense and the state, appellate briefs, and interviews with the attorneys, the police, and witnesses that were involved in the case. I'm not using newspaper articles, books, or existing documentaries. I'm exclusively using direct sources, so everything that you hear will be directly from the horse's mouth. During the course of this season, you will also hear my theories as we dig in. You may agree or disagree, but either way, we would love to hear from you, to create a community so that we can interact and discuss many of these theories. As I said in the last episode, this case is like an onion. There's layer after layer, and it was complicated.
All right, so I'm going to pause right there. So again, when I wrote that, I didn't know that Sam Amoranti was going to refuse to come onto the podcast. As I had said last time that we did a Q&A, I thought that was a for sure. The man had been a part of my life since they were on the case together, and I just thought that was a foregone conclusion. Little did I know that he would end up not coming on the pod. So for Sam, I did have to use his book. And then for Kozenzak, who I did not know would become such a major part of my investigation, I had to use his book because he was deceased. So that particular part right there, just in case somebody wants to try to come back and call me out on it somewhere down the road, is inaccurate, because I did have to use books from 2 different people, one who was deceased, one who refused to come onto the podcast.
And you do announce that
with Terry Sullivan as well, because he also refused.
You do announce that as you do it. You say,
okay,
so-and-so is deceased. Sam, you also explain Sam decided not to come on. So yeah, you do that.
Okay. All right. Let's keep rolling.
So make sure to like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. As I've already heard from numerous listeners who either had close calls with Gacy or some kind of connection with this case, think of this podcast as your safe haven. Don't be shy and reach out. Welcome to Buried, inside the John Wayne Gacy investigation, presented by Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata. This is episode 3.
A pocket full of dimes.
If you recall from last week, we left off on December 13th, 1978. Robbie Piest has gone missing from Nissan Pharmacy. The police have learned from 3 people that when he left the building that he was going to talk to a contractor about a summer job. After the police learn the name of the contractor, Detective Raphael Tovar does a little digging on Gacy.
And what I did, I took the report, a copy of it, and started running name checks on all the people to see, first of all, where they lived and whatnot. And when I did that, I also ran criminal history checks on them. And Gacy's name popped out right away. And I followed up and found out he'd done time in Iowa for sodomy of a child. So he pretty much became a prime candidate.
This sodomy charge that Gacy was convicted of in Iowa in 1968 creates a where there is smoke, there is fire vibe with the police. And that is often the case because typically the first move for any detective looking at a potential suspect is to run their background to see what they've been up to over the years. And what they are looking for is propensity. Does this guy have a violent past? Is he a thief, a drug dealer, etc.? So when Tovar gets the ding on Gacy's background, his ears perk up big time because this guy is a potential creep. We also know that on the 13th, Gacy comes into the station to make a statement, and he denies having any direct contact with Robbie. And while he's there, the Cook County Sheriff and the Des Plaines Police search his home. They don't find Robbie or any clear-cut signs that he was there. They do, however, find that stretch of nylon rope with the hairs. But remember, this is pre-DNA, so comparing hairs with a known sample only goes so far in terms of providing usable evidence. They also find is a class ring, the initials JAS engraved into it. Clearly not Robbie's ring, but a very interesting find nonetheless. And one that would spark suspicion with the police that maybe, just maybe, they're dealing with more than one victim here. But more on that later. Now, when police investigate a crime, they focus on 3 different factors. And those are means, motive, and opportunity, all of which are typically needed in order for the state to secure a conviction at trial. So what do these terms mean? Well, the term means in this context refers to the criminal's physical ability or tools or weapons that the perpetrator has at their disposal. The easiest way to describe this is to use a hypothetical. Say a victim is shot and killed. The officers will come and secure the scene. Evidence technicians will arrive and process it and collect the evidence. And the body will be sent by the police for an autopsy that will be performed by a medical examiner who will determine the cause of death, which in this example is clearly a gunshot. The autopsy may additionally provide the police with the type of gun used, however, such as a handgun, a shotgun, etc., and the caliber of the bullet. If the police can determine the caliber of the weapon used and they have a suspect that they like, who happens to have the same caliber weapon that was used during the commission of the crime registered in their name, well, then the police have established means. Now, motive, it's familiar to all of us. We all know what that means. It's basically the underlying reason that the perpetrator committed the crime. The most common motives are money, jealousy, lust, revenge. In this case, where the motive is not abundantly clear, the police have a much tougher road to hoe in terms of identifying a suspect. The final factor is opportunity, which is being at or within close proximity to the scene of the crime. At this point in time, police were only looking at Gacy. And what they knew was that Gacy was potentially the last person that had seen Robbie Piest alive. So as far as the police were concerned, they could check off the opportunity box. They have nothing as far as means because they don't know if Rob Piest is dead or alive. They may have suspicions, but they don't know. Motive, well, that's not even in play yet, because while they suspect that a crime has been committed, they aren't certain. And the search of Gacy's home, at least on its face, did nothing to change that. The cops needed more, and fast, so they turned up the heat, so to speak, on Gacy. So on December 14th, 3 days after Rob Piest goes missing, the surveillance of Gacy begins in earnest. The 5 police officers charged with that task of following the creep around were the officers Hackmeister, Schultz, Robinson, Albrecht, and Sergeant Lang. No decision was made early on whether or not this was going to be a covert surveillance or not, meaning that Gacy may or may not know whether they were sitting on him. And this was not a clear-cut choice. I mean, think about it. There was a sincere hope by everyone that Rob Piest was still alive, especially in light of the fact that the search didn't produce anything that clearly indicated that he wasn't. So the thought that an open and obvious surveillance would deter Gacy from killing again was not taken into consideration at all. It couldn't have been, based on what they knew at the time. So was the hope that Gacy would slip up and lead them to rob Peace, either dead or alive? Or was it simply that they didn't have enough manpower to conduct covert surveillance? Unfortunately, Lieutenant Kozenzak is no longer with us for me to ask him. It seems to me that there would have been a much greater likelihood that Gacy would have potentially revealed Rob Peace's location if he didn't know that he was being followed. Considering that they knew that Rob's body was not in the house because of the search 2 days earlier, they also knew that Gacy walked into the police station at 3 a.m, covered in mud. So they must have believed that he had gotten rid of the body. They just had absolutely no clue where. It's certainly not uncommon in general for criminals to visit the scene of the crime or to try to check on the status of where they disposed of the remains. Gacy just wasn't that stupid. Gacy knew that he was an active suspect and was rushed when disposing of Rob's body. The police had to be hoping that he was going to go back to cover his tracks more thoroughly because of the fact that they were on to him. The fact that the police had been to his house the day after he had killed Rob Peace and had him come into the station and further searched his home all in 2 days' time clearly would have weighed heavily on Gacy's mind, but not in terms of disposing of the body more thoroughly. As we know, he had already dumped the body into the Des Plaines River in the early morning hours of December 13th. Now, seeing as Gacy knew there was absolutely no way for him to get rid of the bodies in the house and that they had already been in the crawl space during the first search, he had to be hoping against hope that Rob Peace's body didn't float ashore somewhere along its journey down south. Because without the body, Gacy is thinking, they've got nothing on me. Cops didn't know then what we know now, so the scenario still begs the question, how? In the minds of police, how would he get to do that? Get to the body and move it if the cops are on him like stink on shit? I asked Dave Hackmeister that exact question.
Actually, it started on the 13th with Schultz and Robinson. Those were the only two besides the supervisor, Wally Lang, that were in the TAC unit at the time. So Wally really didn't participate in the surveillance. He sent his two guys out, one in each car. And they lost him very early on in that day of 13th. But you really need minimum 4 or 5 cars. Because of the manpower situation we had initially, they just put 2 cars on Gacy. And that's virtually impossible to run a surveillance with 2 cars without the bad guy knowing he's being followed. Yeah, I got to tell you, if Schultz and Robinson were told to do a surveillance on this guy Gacy, their mindset is going to be a covert surveillance because we really didn't know anything but covert surveillance. No one's ever talked about an overt surveillance before. So if they tried initially to do a covert surveillance, I can see how and why they lost them early on. Now, when I came on, the direction was don't lose them. We'd like this to, be a low-key covert surveillance, but if that doesn't work, we don't care. Do not lose this guy. We want to know where he's at all the time. So that was the direction I had. I don't think that was necessarily the direction that Schultz and Robinson had to begin with. Well, covert, obviously, we might catch him doing something that he wouldn't normally want us to know that he's doing. But that was an impossible task with just 2 cars on it. Well, Gacy was a wild man behind the wheel. I mean, he drove 60, 70, 80 miles an hour through red lights, through the city of Chicago. He just drove like an idiot. So all he had to do was look in the rearview mirror and see 2 other idiots behind him, and he knows he's being followed. So it just was a losing effort from the very beginning.
How long do you think it took for him to make you guys, like, realistically?
10 minutes.
That's great. The unintended yet incredibly fortuitous result of this open and obvious tale was that it stopped Gacy from killing again. So that was a massive win, just like Detective Tobar says.
I mean, I think they were kind of hoping that maybe they'd catch him, trying to do something to somebody else. But, that wasn't going to happen because, he knew they were there right away. But on the other hand, we're keeping him from satisfying his itch.
So at that point, the police said, fuck it. Not only are we going to follow him openly, but we're going to follow him into every single public place that he goes, which is exactly what they did. I asked Detectives Mike Albrecht and Dave Hackmeister to give us a little insight about those first days of following Gacy.
The first night when we started Gacy, like I had mentioned, we weren't given any instruction, but kind of made a decision. And I told Dave, I said, if he goes into a public place, we're going to follow him. And so nobody told us that. And one of the first places we went into.
You're muted.
I decided to let you wait, even though I signaled. So
Oh.
I was just going to say, and what's hard for me is, as we've told you guys before, Bob and I are listening to these again as they drop. And now we're listening to them again on the listening party. So sometimes I forget what I heard and when and what I said and when. So, and it might be something that's about to get said. So that's why I sort of like stopped myself. But, I think we talked before about how this had a huge mental impact on Gacy, that he couldn't even go inside someplace without the police following him. And, it definitely added to the stress, which added to the ultimate end at the end of the day. Do you think?
Yeah, there's no question. I think that it was a slow burn, as the days kept moving on. I mean, without giving a spoiler as to what ultimately happens towards the end of the 10 days, which tells you exactly how much it was bothering Gacy, the tale. You just have to know that this was a massive interruption of his lifestyle at that point. He was 6 years into a life of just absolute terror that had been going on for year after year after year. And he had a way that he operated on a daily basis. Like, he probably got more sleep in that 10 days than he had in the 6 years prior collectively. Because, as I've said, I mean, Gacy would work, he was a very successful contractor. Like, he made a lot of money doing what he did. And he hired these kids who he paid shit. They were the ones out doing all the work.
Well, he paid them better than they could get paid anywhere else. That was
Right,
part
and
of his.
And it was still shit. I mean, in terms of what he was making for a job and how much he was having, ending up having to pay out, I
What he'd
mean,
have to pay
Gacy
an
was
adult
doing,
trained contractor.
yeah, I mean, he was doing very, very well. And ultimately, as he begins to realize that they're not going anywhere kind of day after day, there was probably this thing where, Gacy'd walk out of the house hoping that the car wasn't going to be there anymore, meaning the car that, they were sitting in him on,
Sitting on him
in wouldn't be there. And, every day he'd come out and they were still there. So that's when he kind of begins to change his course, I mean, and that's when this weird, whatever you want to call it, this kind of friendship, or what, can't really call it that, because both sides wanted something from the other. There was no part of it that was sincere. It was like I call it, just a game of cat and mouse that both of them were playing with one another.
All right, so let's let it play, because I think we're probably repeating part of what you're going to say.
Was the Moose Lodge in Des Plaines. And my dad was one of the original members of the Moose Lodge. In fact, he was member number 1. And by this time, my dad had passed. But my mom, who attended bar there once in a while, she happened to be sitting in the bar that time. But Gacy showed up there for a private party, some kind of party. And we noticed right away, which happened very frequently when we went into a place, people just gravitated to Gacy. John's here, everybody's happy, pound him on the back, and he was obviously very well liked. And as the week went on, and guys like Tovar and the other investigators were doing the interviews with his contacts, his friends, or whatever, they started, I think, thinking there's maybe more to this than we'd ever think of, and kind of drifted away from Gacy a little bit. And so I kind of feel by the time it was all over with, because his total demeanor changed, we were about all he had left to talk to. And I think we used that to our advantage.
Scroll.
all of Gacy's friends and associates. And if they could somehow thwart our investigation, they would. And we as a team decided we have to somehow separate that all out. We have to get those people out of the way. And that was determined to be the investigator's job. And how they did that was they interviewed all of these people time and time and time again, whether it was at their house or at work or in between. And they were finally, over a short period of time, getting tired of being, for lack of a better term, harassed by the police. So they, within a short period of time again, we noticed that they were starting to back off, which gave us the opportunity to move in and befriend Gacy. Yeah, we had to get him out of the way. It's almost like, okay, Gacy can take care of himself. Right. And a lot of this wasn't like put down on paper. This is our plan. Things were very fluid. They were moving real fast. And we just went with the flow.
Now, so Dave Hackmeister, I think, was the third cop that we talked to after Tovar, after Albrecht. And then we drove up to Galena and sat down with Dave for a few hours. And all of these cops, and I know I've said this already, but it bears repeating, were just wonderful guys to talk to, so down to earth. You know, this part of the, you know, this case has been a weird part of their lives as well for the last 40 years. And I don't know if I told this story. If I have, I'm going to tell it again. But so after the interview with Dave, I think I might have told this on the last one. Did I tell the one where he pulls out all the pictures? Did I talk about that?
I'm at a loss as well. I mean, I know you talked about some things, but I don't remember. Well, how about we ask the chat? Guys, have you heard the story about him pulling out all the photographs? I think that
I feel like maybe I talked about, you know, and it was after they charged Gacy with the murder. You know, and Hackmeister and I had been up there, and that's actually when I learned that Joe Berlinger was moving on with the Gacy tapes thing that he did, that was being produced at the same time that I was producing the podcast based on my, you know, my pitch to him. And then ultimately, you know, Dave's like, I got all of Gacy's personal pictures. Do you want to see them? And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, please. He's like, okay, yeah, you're going to need to put out a couple of these tables. He's like, yeah, probably like 3 or 4 of them. So we put out like 3 or 4 of those like long folding tables that you may use at a family party when you have kids tables and shit like that. So, you know, all about 6 feet long. And he pulls out this huge box of all these photographs that he had taken from Gacy's house after Gacy was placed under arrest for the murder of Rob Peast. And I'm like, holy shit, man. He's like, yeah. He's like all of us, we picked Gacy's house clean.
Right. And you told us that those
about Bill Kunkel, right?
Yeah.
I told about Bill, what Bill took.
Right.
And so ultimately, you know, it was just kind of like a mind-blowing thing, because that's when Dave tells me, oh yeah, he's like, I charged those guys from Netflix to, you know, to take pictures of the pictures. He's like, but for you, I'm going to do it for free. I'm like, oh, thanks, Dave. What a guy. So like they were just,
that's when you realize that they were in the middle of production.
That's exactly when it became known to me, because they didn't let me know, hey, we're running with your pitch, buddy. So then I started, when I uncover what I uncover, I start hounding them. I'm like, hey, you're going to have to change your documentary, big guy, you know, because it's like we just fucking changed the narrative on it. So at any rate, I end up with Dave in particular, like when we walked up, and I may have told this story too, but you know, Dave is like, you were literally the last person I'm ever talking to about this case, you know? And it was just, it was such a, like, I started to realize after I started interviewing these guys, like just how profoundly this case had impacted me, you know? And it's like, I didn't really understand it going into it. It was such a weird, cathartic experience, like the whole thing, because it's different. It's not like I'm a documentarian or that I had done podcasts and I'm one of these people that go out and I'm just trying to interview people and I have no connection to the shit. I'm just trying to make a good podcast. It was different. It was just a very different thing. Everything that was going through my mind was different. everything, in terms of how it made me feel was different. It just was a very, very peculiar situation, and one that was incredibly fulfilling in a lot of different ways. And ultimately, you know, when the thing ended, it was like, that thing where I've told that story, and I'm not going to retell it, but it just had such a massive impact on me. And I felt like this load off my shoulder, because as we're progressing through this thing, the amount of pressure that I had on me to produce a script,
That was
because
good.
Darren, was living with us. He flew in from New Orleans. He was living in our basement where our studio was, staying up all night trying to clean the tapes. And I'm trying to produce this thing where I don't have the pressure of some media company saying, okay, you signed a contract, you have to have this thing out every week without fail, or you're in breach of contract. So none of that existed for me, but it was this self-imposed pressure that I had, because I dropped the podcast and we knew that we were dropping it without other episodes in the can. So there was no choice but for me to sit my ass down, go through all the reports, do my digging, write the script, go out and do the interviews after I've set them up, because I knew it had to be done. So it was like there was so much pressure on me. And again, it was like Allie didn't say shit to me. She wasn't like, shouldn't you be writing an episode
Cracking the
now?
whip. What you doing, man? Get out there.
Are you
Get
watching
down
the
there.
Bears game?
What
you
the
need? So none of that existed. So it was a really, and to go from practicing law to go into the world of creative, is a very different thing, so it was really a thing wherein I had to kind of change the way that I operated entirely, because now I had deadlines that were different than court deadlines. There, you have drop dead deadlines as well. Like, you don't get this shit filed, you're fucked. So it's like I didn't have that kind of thing laying over my head, but I felt like I did, so it was
Right.
it was a strange experience.
Well, you did good work, though. But before you go back, I just want to comment on the part that we just heard, because, and I just don't remember actually processing this aspect of it before. And I find it very interesting that the cops had to get through his social circle in order to get him in a position where he really only had them to talk to. And
Right.
that, so that's interesting. And it doesn't surprise me that the cops hanging around all the time, that cops asking you time and time again about what this guy does, implying that he has done something toward with the missing child. They're starting to think, well, holy shit, like, where there's smoke, there's fire, and they're backing away. And as the officer said, that opened the door for them to quote unquote, so-called befriend him.
Yeah. Yeah, because
and
he had friends and business partners, like, because Gacy had his hands in all kinds of things. I mean, the guy was obsessive about making money, and that became apparent. But he had his crew. He had his crew of people that he hung around with, and like you said, that became incumbent upon the cops to try to circle him in a way that those people are gonna be like, you know what, I'm not gonna fuck with John right now, because
something's going on.
something's going on, and I don't want to be sucked into it. I don't
Right.
want
And
to.
it sort of took the wind out of John's sails, where he, Gacy likes to be the important man in the room. He likes to be looked up to. He likes to feel important. He was not able to do those things because of the way these officers were conducting the investigation, which all contributed to his spiral and, the evolution of this 10 days working out the way it did.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's keep going.
Now, remember that Maine West class ring that was discovered in the first search, the ones with the initials JAS? Well, those clearly aren't Robbie's initials. So in terms of solving the Peast abduction, that particular object does not seem relevant. But the question of whose initials they are and why in the hell is that ring in Gacy's house persists in the minds of law enforcement. So they decide to look into it.
Well, one particular thing is we found a class ring from Maine West, and he had the initials JAS. So we went back found the juvenile division in Des Plaines had yearbooks from Maine West because they dealt with them a lot. And looked up the year, found the ring. John A. Zick, local kid, ran his name through.
All right. So I saw Samantha Lee was asking that. That's what I'm saying. You got to
wait, babe. Remember, this is going to go audio. So you say a listener, Samantha Lee, asked what, like specifically?
She asked, did they ever identify whose class ring that was? And that's what I've been saying about this podcast. This podcast is so densely packed with facts. There is little to no filler in this podcast. I call it's all meat. So if you space out for 20 seconds, you've missed it, because
right. So this is not the time to listen to the podcast, because with us interjecting and giving you the behind the scenes and talking, the story gets, you're not getting the full story experience. So we're hoping either people have already listened or they're going to go ahead and listen again afterwards.
Uninterrupted. Yeah, it's
right, uninterrupted.
This
isn't
uninterrupted.
Yeah.
It's like anything. It's the same concept of watching a show with streaming where you don't have commercials than watching a show and it's at the apex of a critical scene and it rips you into a bunch of ads. And you're like, what the fuck, man? Same concept, except instead of us being ads, it's Allie and I. So we highly recommend that everybody goes and listens to these from front to back. And if you're like in Allie's, like, I keep wondering about this whole thing, like individual listening devices, like why there's so many, why it doesn't add up to the number of downloads. And I'm like, well, say for instance, somebody's listening to the first half of the podcast while they're driving somewhere to go do some kind of errand. And, then they stop, they turn the car off, they get out, they go do their errand, they get back in, and then they listen to it for a bit and they're like, oh shit, I got 10 minutes left. And then they go in the house and then they listen to it on a different. So continuity matters with the podcast, because like I said, if you're breaking it up or you're spacing out, you're going to miss facts. There's without question. All right, let's keep rolling.
We found out he was missing.
At this point, the question of who and what they are dealing with becomes a pressing issue. Clearly, Robbie's disappearance remains the focus of their investigation, but the new evidence that is surfacing simply cannot be ignored. So the investigation bisects, and they begin looking into the Zick disappearance as well. If you recall in the last episode, when we learned of the first search of Gacy's house on December 13th and the 60 or so items which were recovered, how at that time officers didn't know whether or not certain items had any significance. Well, that's the nature of an investigation like this. Pieces start to fall into place, sometimes by luck, sometimes by straight police work, and sometimes by both. Now, one of the items that I didn't mention earlier wasn't a piece of physical evidence at all, but in fact, it was a photograph, one of several that was taken by the officers during the search of Gacy's home. This particular photograph depicted a nondescript portable Motorola television that was in Gacy's bedroom. You may be asking yourself, what in the hell does this have to do with the disappearance of Rob Piest? And the answer is, not a damn thing. But the missing kid, John Zick, well, that's a different story. So when John Zick went missing, so did his vehicle, which we will get into in much greater detail in later episodes. What contained in the trunk of Zick's vehicle was a small Motorola TV that appeared very similar to the one that was depicted in the one particular photograph taken during the search. Now, these pictures that were taken of various items in the house that did not appear to have any relation to Rob Piest's abduction will become an issue, because if you recall, warrants must specify what is being searched for. It's not a free-for-all, but that is an issue that will be dealt with down the road by the trial attorneys. Right now, the detective.
And you'll remember from last episode, episode 2, Prosecutor Kunkel spoke on that, and that was last episode, right?
Yeah.
And he even acknowledged that some of the things that were collected and some of the evidence wasn't really connected, specifically with the warrant or, Rob, the current missing persons investigation. So, and yes, Bob does go over all of this again when we get to the episodes on the warrants.
Detectives are using everything they have at their disposal to catch who they believe at this point is a killer.
That I had met Vic at Chicago in Clark Street or something like that. You know, just cruising around. I would pull up at the lights, he nodded to me, I nodded back to him. I pull over to the side, he got in the car. He was looking for money. And he was interested in getting into having some fun. Very simple. The next morning, Roxy and I drove down in my car and looked for the white Plymouth Satellite with the banged up front fender, which was parked on Clark Street across from the Newberry Theater. We went down there. He drove that car, and I drove mine. We drove back to my house. He opened up the trunk. He cleaned out the trunk, and he wanted the car. And I said, "Well, hell," I said, "what do I get for it?" I said, "I'll tell you what. I said, I'll give you the car for $300." He said, "He didn't have the money," and I said, "Well, we'll work it out another way." He drove the car back to my house. I drove my car back. I said, "No, we're going to have to get rid of everything that was in the car." "Yeah, exactly. Leave it to me. I'll get rid of everything in the car." And I think the tire was in the car. Also some plates, and I told him it wasn't a wise idea. He found license plates in the trunk. There was a television in the trunk, license plates in the trunk, jewelry, women's clothing, wigs. There was stuff in the trunk. I went in the house, and I believe I put the body down in the throne.
Detective Tovar, after learning that John Zick had been missing for about a year.
So I want to ask you about this, Bob, because what we just heard was Gacy describe how, he's back at the house with, is this victim number?
Zick?
Yeah. Do we know?
I think he was either victim 2 or 4.
Okay, so he's got Zick in the house, and then immediately after the unaliving, him and Rossi, right?
Yeah, actually, Zick was probably later, actually, because if Rossi was involved, which he was, at least in terms of, I don't want to give a spoiler, he would have had to have been sometime between 76 and 78.
Okay, and so that was my whole point of bringing this up, is that Rossi's already, the two of them are going to look for this guy's car, and Rossi's already asking for the car. This whole concept that he was not a part of, or involved in, or had knowledge that this guy whose car he's asking for was just killed is absurd.
Yeah, it's right. I've got strong feelings about Rossi and Cram. There's no question about that.
Pays a visit to the young man's mother, as he wants to show her pictures of other evidence that had been photographed during the search, namely a shirt and a watch. Tovar wants to know if Zick's mother can positively identify either of those items as belonging to her son. Unfortunately, Mrs. Zick informs Tovar, "No, those are not my son's property." Tovar, obviously disappointed, seemingly hits a dead end. Or has he? Because before Tovar leaves Mrs. Zick's home, she gives him a brown lunch bag filled with various papers. Tovar takes the bag from her and leaves.
The television, we went for the first search warrant. We took the county did. They were, because it's in their territory. They took photographs of the entire house. And I remember seeing on TV that kind of resembled what she described. Had a kind of handle on it. It was a Motorola, but she had no paperwork on it. So then I said, "Well, we'll go talk to Motorola." Went to Motorola. They don't make those TVs anymore. They don't make TVs at that time. And there was a little old guy there, a janitor, actually, which is an interesting side story here. He kind of like asked us what we wanted. I want to tell him that we're looking for a particular TV. He says, "You know what?" He says, "I collect every brochure, every TV we ever made." And he said, "Let me look and I'll try to find it." Because we did have the model. We did have the model number. Well, lo and behold, a couple of days later, comes in with a little brochure. And the freaky thing about it was, how TVs always have a simulated picture, and then the simulated picture of this TV was a clown. But I said, "Whoa, this is really weird."
I know I keep hammering home the fact that this is all going down in 1978, but that's because it's such an important fact for you to remember. Because essentially what was going on with this team of officers that are investigating this case is that they are in a situation wherein the left hand does not necessarily know what the right hand is doing. Information trickles in between the members of the team as the officers on the tail basically have no clue what the officers in the field are discovering or not discovering, and vice versa.
I didn't really realize it until the next day when I'm being relieved how dangerous it is, because I have no communication at all with anybody. Once I leave this planes, I have no radio communication. And then I'm now picking up little bits and pieces about, hey, our victim might have been killed, plus there might be a few others involved. So I'm thinking it's not good for one guy to sit out here with no communication. So that very next day, I said, listen, I think I really need a partner out here. I'm on a midnight shift. We worked midnight to noon, and the other shift worked noon to midnight. So I knew Mike. I knew Mike was working on the desk, and I asked Mike, hey, if they're looking for somebody, would you mind volunteering for the position? And Mike said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So Mike jumped in, and he became my partner for the Gacy case. Us as a surveillance team, we'd only pick that information up when we were being debriefed. That happens when we're leaving. So we're relieved by the other team. Wally drives us back to the PD. We get a very quick debriefing on what happened with the investigators. We kind of tell them what we saw with Gacy, and then they wanted us to go home right away, catch some sleep. Plus, everything we did, everything we observed, we had to write down. We weren't talking into a tape recorder. So as soon as we got somewhere, we had a minute or two. We had to write down exactly where we went, what route we took, what was going on there. And we were also writing down, things that Gacy said. It's pretty tedious.
Now, in light of what Hackmeister just said, I want you to try and imagine how much more difficult this makes things for the investigation teams. It makes what they ultimately were able to accomplish all that more impressive. So while Tovar is sniffing out the television lead, the surveilling team is following Gacy's every move. As Gacy now knows they are on him, an incredibly strange thing occurs. Gacy befriends his pursuers.
Then Gacy left by himself, and as he goes by, he says, hey, I'm going to grab a bite to eat. Is there any place close by that you guys know of? There just happened to be a restaurant called the Pot and Pan not too far away. It's a 24-hour restaurant. We mentioned that to him. So he went over there, and after he went in, we followed him in, sat a couple tables away, and Gacy finally just looks at us and says, hey, as long as you're going to be in here, why don't you just sit with me? So we went over and said, hey, that's what you want. That's good with us. And then we just started all kinds of different conversations. It started out with, I don't know, what are you guys following me for? Am I being looked at for some drug transactions, or is it about this kid that's supposedly missing? And we were very concerned about how we were standing legally with this whole thing. Are we infringing on his rights? Although he's inviting us in, that's the thing in plus for us. So we just went with the flow, just tried to let our instincts go with it. And he talked about everything. He talked about being a registered clown and how he likes to help these young kids who are hospitalized. And since he's a registered clown, he could go there and entertain these poor kids. And he talked about his business and how successful he was. And we were beginning to realize that he was, pretty much of a braggart. He loved to talk about himself. And so we kind of played on that a little bit. We asked him how he became so successful, and he would talk about, he even talked about when he would go into a drugstore, how he would talk to the pharmacist about how to face different products. He says, you don't want to put anything that is a hot seller on the bottom shelves. You want to get them at eye level. So he's consulting all these pharmacists on how to push their products, so he was very, very impressed with himself. And he also asked us about Rob Peace. He said, hey, I'm really concerned about this kid. I like young kids. If there's anything I can do anything to help. If you want me to help search for him, get on a search team, I'll do anything. But I got to tell you, I don't know anything about the kid. But we're trying to get him to say something that would lead us in a particular direction. And he's trying to get, we could tell he's trying to get information from us as to what we know. So we're feeding him a bunch of crap and he's feeding us a bunch of crap, what it amounts to. And I think we both realized it. Matter of fact, at one point, when he talked about being covered in mud, we were talking about vacation spots. And he says, I got this place up in Spooner, Wisconsin. And he says, this is the best place ever. If you ever want to get away, it's so desolate out there. Nobody even knows you're there. He says, but the place I stay at has got this real long driveway. And every time I go in that driveway, I get stuck in the mud. And Mike and I are like, okay, we know where the body's at. Know exactly where the body's at. Now, back then, we couldn't, text and tell our boss where it is. What we did, we had a handful or a pocket full of dimes. And as soon as...
All right. So just a little factoid. Okay. Well, that's why we're doing this.
No, I know, but
people want to keep the vibe, then they go listen to the regular episode.
But I text you a message as to where to stop, and it was like one sentence down.
I understand. But so I'll stop there too. So if you'll notice that the episode name for this particular episode is A Pocket Full of Dimes. So that's where we got that. That this is, again, Dave Hackmeister, and he's talking about this concept that this isn't like the TV shows where everybody's on, their little radio in the car talking to one another. They had handhelds that had short battery lives, and they just couldn't communicate with anybody. So they would literally have to have a pocket full of dimes, and they would stop at payphones in order to call into the police station to talk to their lieutenant and be like, hey, this is some shit we just found out. So we love that.
Yeah. And, Darren, the producer, he would have to listen to everything, handle all Bob's recordings. He's also listening to all the other audio that he's deciding to insert in, what part of the Gacy tapes, what part of the interviews. So he would do all that, and then he'd come up with a name. He always came up with the best names.
Yeah, he named all the episodes, which we kept. We kept all the episode names with the exception of one. There was one that we took a little heat for the first time around.
Piece of the puzzle.
Yes, so we changed that one.
Darren wanted to change it, yeah.
Yeah. And kind of another behind the scenes fact is this was my first podcast. Obviously, this was the first time I was ever interviewing people where we were intending on using the sound for other people to listen to for enjoyment. So it would drive Darren insane because if you know me, I'm a bit of a talker. So I would always have a hard time. Like I would ask a question to one of these guys that I was interviewing for me not to react. Like if they said something that was funny, like the thing where, we asked him how long did it take Gacy to make you guys in terms of the tale, and he's like 10 minutes, and everybody in the room started laughing.
Right, you heard Darren there too, so
yeah, Darren, that was one where Darren couldn't control himself either. But there's just a lot of times where you'll kind of hear me in the background where Darren does his very best to try to cut me out. I learned as we went along. I got better at it where I just had to keep quiet, even if I had a follow-up question or even if I wanted it to turn into kind of more of an organic conversation. Because I kept telling Darren, I'm like, I don't want these to be just like normal interviews. He's like, but yeah, that makes for shitty sound. Like you have to ask a question. You have to allow them to answer fully. And then you ask something else. I'm like, I'll forget what I wanted to say. So,
but the other thing, another behind the scenes thing is, so that sentence there and that's Tovar, right? No,
that's Hackmeister.
And he says, we know exactly where the body's at. Darren took that sentence and it becomes, and I haven't heard it yet.
So I don't know when he did it. It
must be future episodes, but it becomes like, what do you call that? The end tagline.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you remember watching like Family Ties, like at the end of the show, they would always have that thing where they said, sit, Ubu, sit. Good dog. So it was like we put it at the very, very end of the episode. It's kind of like, as Allie says, like a little bit of an Easter egg. But that particular thing, when you do get to those episodes where we start putting that in, comes from that line of Hackmeister looking over to Mike and saying, oh, we know where the body's at. We know exactly where the body's at. So that's where that comes from.
Oh, wait.
We go to a pay.
Sorry. And maybe go back 10 seconds because I don't want you to pause it again because I want people to now hear this fluidly. But if you're paying attention to the chat, and if you haven't heard this before, this part of the storyline is what I was most compelled by. I found the most compelling, had a very emotional reaction to it. That's this next part of the story that Bob's getting into. We're going to let the whole portion play out, and then Bob will pause it at the end.
Yeah, so we got a question, and it's, Bob, what made you take the creep out of the new episodes? I didn't. In episodes 3, early on, I didn't land on calling him the creep, like fully, until later in the podcast. So I'm obviously, I refer to him as being a creep, or he's got real creep tendencies. But in terms of me renaming him the creep, that happens later on. So we didn't take that out. It just hasn't happened yet. I'm assuming Melissa has listened to the original. So no, we didn't change any of that. It just hasn't occurred yet. All right. So I want to go back 15 seconds. So
Best place ever it amounts to. And I think we both realized it. Matter of fact, at one point, when he talked about being covered in mud, we were talking about vacation spots. And he says, I got this place up in Spooner, Wisconsin. And he says, this is the best place ever. If you ever want to get away, it's so desolate out there. Nobody even knows you're there. He says, but the place I stay at has got this real long driveway. And every time I go in that driveway, I get stuck in the mud. And Mike and I are like, okay, we know where the body's at. Know exactly where the body's at. Now, back then, we couldn't, text and tell our boss where it is. What we did, we had a handful or a pocket full of dimes. And as soon as we were free, we'd go to a payphone, dial up our boss and tell him, hey, you got to get to Spooner, Wisconsin, get a helicopter up there and start looking for some unearthed ground.
This bizarre relationship that develops between the hunters and the hunted as they both probe and search for answers from one another would ultimately lead to a final showdown in the days to come that will reveal answers that neither was prepared for or wanted to hear. Following up on the developing case regarding the disappearance of John Zick, Detective Tovar heads into Chicago to talk to the officer who took the missing persons report back in January of 1977. Tovar sits down and starts asking some questions of the officer. He inquires about the vehicle that was registered in John Zick's name. Tovar probes on. He further learns that at some point in December of 77 that someone had stolen gas from a service station and that one of the attendants working at the station caught the plate of the vehicle as it sped away. Chicago police were able to track that vehicle. However, when they locate the registration, they discovered that the Plymouth Satellite was no longer registered to John Zick, but in fact was registered to a man named Michael Rossi. And the date of the title of the transfer is after the date that Zick is reported missing. CPD track down Rossi and bring him in for questioning regarding the theft of the gas. Rossi shows up and they ask him about stealing the gas. He cops to it. The officer then asks him how he came to own a vehicle that belonged to a man that had been reported missing. Rossi looks at the cop and he tells him that he bought the car off of his boss. And he's not sure how his boss came into owning the car, but that if he wants to call him or go over to his place and ask him, he's sure that he can explain the whole thing to him. All he knows is that he paid $300 for the car and he is the legitimate owner. The cop says, fair enough. What's the guy's address? The guy who sold you the car. Rossi pauses and then answers, oh, my boss? His name is John Gacy, and this is his address. Rossi is allowed to leave the station. Immediately after Rossi leaves, the cop jumps into his car and drives over to Gacy's house. He then knocks on the door. Gacy answers. The cop tells him that his employee, Mike Rossi, had just been picked up for theft and that they had tracked him down by the license plates, and that Rossi had just told him that he had bought the vehicle in question from him. Gacy says, oh yeah, so? The cop pauses and says, well, that particular vehicle was owned by a young man named John Zick. Oh yeah, Gacy says. Yeah, he approached me one day on the job and asked me if I had any interest in buying his car because he was going to be moving out to California. So I helped the kid out. Even though I didn't need the car, Rossi was desperate for a car, so I sold it to him for $300. The cop thought that this conversation left a lot to be desired, so he decides to follow up on Gacy's story. So he locates the address for Zick's parents and drives over to speak with them. The officer first asks Mrs. Zick when she last heard from her son. She begins crying immediately. She was so relieved and thankful that the police were finally following up on her son's case. She goes on to explain that she has not seen nor heard from her son since January of '77. The officer explains to her that she can relax because her son is fine. He's just moved to California back in early January. Nothing nefarious has occurred. This man named Gacy just verified that he bought your son's car. So, John had the money to move out west. He proceeds to show her the vehicle registration. The officer, fully expecting Mrs. Zick to be relieved at hearing this good news, was shocked when she once again breaks into tears. The officer says, "Ma'am, what is it?" Unable to fully catch her breath, she explains to the officer that Johnny had just signed a lease in a new apartment a couple of months prior to his disappearance, and that his girlfriend was going to be moving in with him. He was excited about it, and he would never have moved to California without telling her. He had never gone more than a couple of days without calling her, at least to say hi, until he disappeared. The officer felt a pit forming in his stomach. And his car, she says, was his most prized possession. He never would have sold it. She asked to see the registration. The cop hands it over to her. She looks at it and asks him to wait here for a minute and retreats back into the house. She returns several minutes later and shows the officer a sheet of paper bearing the signature of John A. Zick. She points at the sheet of paper and holds up the registration next to it. This signature on the title looks nothing like my Johnny's signature. Nothing. The cop looks down at both signatures. And while he is no handwriting expert, it is clear that John Zick had not signed the title of the vehicle over to Mike Rossi. My God, the cop thought to himself. He tells Mrs. Zick that she's been very helpful and that he'll be in touch with her. He jumps into his cruiser and speeds back to the station. He bursts into his lieutenant's office, declaring that he's just solved a missing persons case. His lieutenant hears him out, and he instructs him to start drafting a complaint for search warrant for this guy Gacy's house, because this definitely amounts to probable cause for a warrant. The officer prepares the complaint for warrant and is in front of a judge within 3 hours. The judge looks at the complaint and determines that there is, in fact, probable cause for the warrant and issues it then and there. The Chicago police in December of 1977 effectuate the warrant on Gacy's home, and during the search discover a Maine West class ring bearing the initials JAS, John Zick's initials. The officer immediately calls Mrs. Zick to inquire as to whether her son attended Maine West. Yes, he did. Well, did he own a class ring with his initials engraved into it? Yes, he did. What's John's middle name? Alan, she says. I still have the receipt somewhere for the ring. The cop hangs up the phone, with his hands visibly shaking. Armed with this information, the Chicago police secure an arrest warrant for John Wayne Gacy. Are you thinking, wait, what the fuck? This guy's been talking about this class ring with those initials for the last 2 episodes being found in December of 1978. Yeah, there's no need to rewind that story that you've just heard to double check that you heard it right, because you did. And what you heard just now was a work of fiction. That is unequivocally what should have happened. What actually happened is that after Gacy gave the cop Zick moving to California story, they chose not to follow up at all, ever. As a result, Robert Edward Gilroy, age 18, was killed September 15th, 1977 by John Wayne Gacy. John Anthony Mowry, age 19, was killed by John Wayne Gacy September 25th, 1977. Russell Lloyd Nelson, age 21, was killed by John Wayne Gacy October 17th, 1977. Robert David Winch, age 16, was killed by John Wayne Gacy November 10th, 1977. Tommy Joe Bowling was 20 years old, killed by John Wayne Gacy November 18th, 1977. David Paul Talsma, 19, killed by John Wayne Gacy December 9th, 1977. William Wayne Kindred, age 19, killed by John Wayne Gacy February 16th, 1978. Timothy David O'Rourke, age 20, killed by John Wayne Gacy between June 16th and the 23rd of 1978. Frank William Landigan, age 19, killed by John Wayne Gacy November 4th, 1978. James Mazzara, age 20, killed by John Wayne Gacy, November 24th, 1978. And Robert Jerome Peast, killed by John Wayne Gacy, December 11th, 1978. All these young men lost their lives at the hands of this monster, and it shouldn't have been. But what seems to be a running theme that I've heard repeatedly in my interviews with law enforcement was that kids that went missing during the 70s were by default thought to be runaways, not victims, which was a bleed over from the mid to late 60s in the era of free love, anti-war protest, and anti-establishment sentiments that were being espoused by the youth at that time. Well, the pushback from the establishment was in large part to view these thousands of kids that went missing in the 70s just as hippies being hippies. But this response by the government came at a very steep price. And it wasn't just the loss of Gacy's victims. It was the loss of American innocence, as everything related to the safety of our children changed on that cold December day when the first bones were discovered in Gacy's crawl space. I'd like to thank detectives Mike Albrecht, Raphael Tovar, and Dave Hackmeister, and Linda for taking time out of their busy schedules to give us the insights that they gave us during this episode. I'd like to give some credit where credit is due, as simply put, without the hard work of these people, this podcast would not exist. My sorcerer of sound, executive producer Darren Wood, producer Marty Fairley, the maestro of music Taras Horolewski, and Ryan Gack, who mixes and masters all of Taras's beautiful haunting music, Alex Carver, who created all the amazing art, and Allison Mata, who makes all of the things that need to happen to make sure this podcast is accessible to you, and finally to you, the listeners, who without your support, I would just be some guy talking to himself about a 40-year-old case. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart.
All right, there you go.
So, I mean, it still chills me, just the hearing of the names of all the victims that would not have been victims had they done their job. But can you circle back and tell us, so how much of the story is accurate? So Tovar did reach out to this officer, the Chicago police.
Yeah,
correct?
they went they went a few times, and there were two different stations that were involved. And in terms of were a majority, because remember, in terms of the kids that didn't work for Gacy, they were kids that he would typically pick up in this area called Bug House Square or down by the lake where kids were known to congregate and kind of party and hang out at night. And yeah, I mean, they went over and they would ask for the file in terms of what investigation they had done. And I'm talking about Chicago police when Desplaines was going over trying to look into Zick or Johnny Bukovich. And, they'd go to some, filing cabinet and they'd pull out, a small file that had a piece of paper in it. And they'd say, well, yeah, we called the parent, or, we called, the one in the one circumstance with Bukovich, they went over to Gacy's house, and that's Gacy tells that same story, that he said he was moving down to Mexico about Bukovich. And
So they
as we
didn't-
get to that Bukovich story, there's an actual thing that happened where a phone call comes in. And I think it was from Puerto Rico, where somebody's claiming that John Bukovich is there. So it's like, I don't want to give you any spoilers. You're just going to have to listen to all
But
of
as
that.
far as that story, did the police even go and ask Gacy, and Gacy told them he moved to California?
Are you talking about Chicago police?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that part happened, but then they never did any of that follow-up. They never went back to
None
the
of
mom. They
it.
never
No,
compared the...
none of it.
Right.
That was all fiction. That was
So-
what should have happened. That's that modicum of police work. You don't have to be Monk to figure that out, to follow those breadcrumb trails,
And
to
just
lead
tell the
directly to
mom,
Gacy.
right? They say, right? They said he moved to California. And we're like, okay, wash their hands of it.
Yeah, no, it was. I am particularly brutal to the Chicago Police Department in this podcast, and they deserve all of it. They did nothing. They did nothing. When I say I put those victims that I named at the end of that episode directly on their heads. Yes, Gacy's the one who did it, but Gacy shouldn't have been on the street to have done it. That's the thing. And as I said, I like it. Going into this episode, I was already infuriated with the cops, the Chicago PD. I'm like, what the fuck?
It was right there for
Like,
them.
like I'm going through it. I'm like, they had everything that I talked about with the title. When I get into the Zick killing later in the season, and then this whole thing about the car and Gacy, when he forges the title and he hands it over to Rossi, and Rossi drives around in that thing for a year in John Zick's car. It's they had
Never
everything
charged.
they needed.
Never charged. Meanwhile, he's asking for a car of a guy who was just at the house. What? How do you know that this guy doesn't need his car anymore, buddy?
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. Yeah, I mean, it's like when you're talking about that threshold of probable cause to get a warrant to get into Gacy's house after Zick, and frankly, they had it long before that with John Bukovich. They had almost the same shit, and in both those cases, with John Zick's mother and Johnny Bukovich's dad, hounding them, saying, please, I'm telling you, please, my son worked for this guy. He knows something. Like, look into that guy. Like John Bukovich's father knew that the last person that John was going to see on the day that he went missing was John Gacy, and they did nothing. And again, they find John Bukovich's car with his wallet in it and his jacket in it.
And there's not an excuse with Chicago. I mean, maybe they're different. I don't know if they were in different districts, but Chicago should be able to communicate with Chicago to be able to look up what other people are investigating and see.
Yeah, and just to be clear, if you guys you didn't listen to it when we initially dropped it, and this is a new podcast for you, I go very, very deep into Mike Rossi and David Cram. You are going to be leaving this podcast not saying I agree about Rossi and Cram and think they might have known stuff. You're going to think way more than that. And you're going to think way more than they knew by the time I'm done with this podcast.
I mean, I think I felt that just from that little story, that he brings John Zick home. Rossi's clearly there. After he tosses, as he calls it, throws the body in the crawl space, they hop into his car and they're going to get John Zick's car.
Right.
Clearly, and then the guy's asking for it right away. And the title gets signed over to him right away. And he's driving it ever since. And he's asking about getting rid of the license plate. And,
And the very TV that we're talking about in the episode, the little portable Motorola, is the exact TV that Gacy's discussing in the tapes with my father. Like that's all the same shit. Yeah, it's crazy. Like if you're coming in thinking that you saw or heard or learned anything in The Devil in Disguise or anything you've ever watched, you haven't. This is a whole different thing. This is the deepest dive. And I had no idea when I started this thing how it was going to turn out. None. Like the things that I'm writing, I'm learning about, again, remember, in real time. Like, this wasn't produced 6 months ahead of time, and it's like, frankly, as I listen to it now, I'm like, man, I'd really like to re-record episodes 1 through 3 because my podcasting is so much better now, but that comes with 4 years of experience of doing.
And I like the evolution.
Yeah, the evolution's there.
How real it is. I mean, to me, I love it exactly the way it is. And that's why when we do these behind the scene things, we'll pause and be like, all right, that just shows you Bob thought this series was going to go one direction and it took a completely different direction. And it's something that the listeners, it's not like they're surprised as to why it's happening, because they're getting it all explained to them in real time. So to you guys in real time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep doing these because a lot of people want to hear it, and I think that it's worth it for us to do it because I think ultimately, as this thing continues to gain steam and the podcast keeps getting out to more and more people, there's going to be more and more people like that have questions about it. And when you guys start getting to episode 6 through 11 and beyond, where this thing comes up, where I uncover this long held secret, man, I'm dying. I've been wanting to talk about it forever.
well, I do want to just note, and I forgot it when we played this portion of the tape. You heard in this portion, I think it's Hackmeister, and I'm sorry because I don't know all the officers by voice and name, so you'll have to correct me. It could have been Tovar. Talk about how they were concerned about the legality of their actions, in that they were following Gacy all the time. They're going in, you know, they're following him into public places. They're never leaving his side. They're there 24 hours a day. And he still to this day expresses they were concerned about how that was going to play out legally.
Yeah, no, which and we talk about it all the time consistently on our channel. I mean, cops, they don't understand how the law operates, right? I mean, they're basically in a world where they're knowledgeable of a statute that may exist, but in terms of what is required in order to either get a warrant and or whether it be for search or arrest and beyond is not what they're taught. So they don't understand those types of things, and they rely on their superiors who rely on prosecutors to tell them, all right, look, this is what we need to do here because this is what the law requires in order for us to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So, and that's a reality for cops. And any cop that you ask who hasn't gone to law school, which there are cops that decide to go to law school, but those that don't, which is a vast majority of them, they'll be the first to tell you that they don't really understand the law in the way that attorneys do, because you can't.
And I can just attest to that. I had a client whose brother was a cop, and he asked me the most ridiculous. I was shocked at I was like, wow. And I mean, he wasn't a detective. I think detectives know more than your average beat cop. He was a beat cop, but he just really knew nothing. And I want to comment because you've got Miller Time, who is listening. He says, I keep listening or watching. I keep listening. I kept thinking when I listened to episode 11, I need somewhere to go and discuss this with other people. And then you have Kristen H. Estrada responding, right? I've started taking notes, LOL. So just so you know, there is a Facebook community for just that. It's the Defense Diaries Insiders group. And that's for all the listeners to discuss episodes with each other, to talk about things. So you might find that to be a fun community for you.
Yeah. And here, we're gonna do it here for sure.
And here, but I'm saying
I like the thing that I didn't know that I needed in my life when we started this YouTube channel was you guys. Like having the ability to be able to do this in real time and watch the chat and read the chat and see questions is super fulfilling for me, especially when it comes to this case, because as you can imagine, I could talk about this shit for hours. I mean, there is nobody on the planet that knows more about this case than I do. And, people like, and I'll have people like, well, why don't you talk about, the Gecht thing and the connections and the Dean Coral connection down in Texas and how Gacy was a part of a bit. I'm like, that wasn't what this podcast was about, but that doesn't mean that I never discuss it in other forums.
And you anticipate doing a season 2? I guess it would be of Buried Now instead of the Gacy tapes.
Yeah, and I had seen somebody had asked, Bill Dorsch is fine. Bill got irritated with me because things weren't moving as quickly as Bill wants them to. And I understand that Bill is old. Bill wants to make sure that we're able to do this before it's too late for him. But Bill's fine. Bill will be back. I promise. I can, as close as I can come to guaranteeing that, I can guarantee it. But I just had to handle other things, and Bill was wanting to go full bore on this. And my problem from Bill's side was that Bill lives in Europe, so as a part of having to move out there for another case where he was a whistleblower. So Bill's good. Bill knows that I love him, and I know that Bill loves me. He just
All right,
he got irritated with me. So Robin had asked this question. I knew you were young, Bob, but I'm curious, did you ever meet or see Gacy yourself? No, I didn't. I lived at the time with my mother in Colorado Springs back at that time frame. My parents had divorced when I was young. When I was 5, I was 10 when the case happened. And that's that whole story that I tell in the first episode, where I had flown back for my winter break visitation with my dad. And there's a story that my father had told me many, many times over the years, is that as the case was approaching, he had called my mother and said, and I think I discussed this on the first one of these that we did. But my mom, was told by my father, look, I want to bring Bobby to the opening statements of the trial. And my mom's like, absolutely not. Like, he is 10 years old. There's no chance in hell that I'm allowing him to go into that courtroom on that day to hear any of this horrific shit. So and my mom was right. As much in retrospect as I would have loved to have been able to be there, I wouldn't have understood a majority of what I was watching. Again, these are simpler times in the 70s and 80s for kids. There was a much greater sense of innocence for children back then. We didn't have access to everything that our kids have access to now in terms of the internet and just everything that comes along with that. So, that innocence has been lost. But back then, I think I would never hold it against my mother for her saying not a chance. I think that was
appropriate.
proper thing for a mother to do in terms of protecting her child. So, but I also understand my father wanting me to be there. For him, this was a major event in his life and in his career as an attorney. And, I could see why he would want me to be a part of that with him. So I get both sides of it. But yeah, no, I never met Gacy. My grandmother oddly became a pen pal with Gacy, which is super fucking weird. But it's just there's just a lot of weird things. Like I have, and I tell this all the time. I went to high school and used to hang out with a kid named Oliver Lacey at Oak Park River Forest, who ended up being one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims.
Hmm.
And I just have some kind of bizarre kind of connection with some of these serial killers. And I think this is probably going to be the last kind of tidbit that I throw out to y'all. So if you guys follow my TikTok account, because I don't know that we ever did an official podcast episode on it, but when the story about a woman named Lucy Studi came out, there was I believe it was a People magazine article, probably about 2 years ago at this point. And Lucy was claiming that her father that she believed that he was a serial killer, that he had killed somewhere between 50 and 70 different women, at least to her memory, when she was a child, and that he had thrown these bodies in these wells down on this property in Green Hollow, Iowa, which is probably about a half an hour from the border of Nebraska and Omaha. And so I immediately became completely fascinated with this potential case that might exist from a lot of different perspectives, from the lawyer's perspective, from a true crime content maker's perspective, from a lawyer's perspective, from like
A
everything,
human being's
from
perspective.
like from yes, just wanting to and from a psychology perspective of trying to be able to communicate with Lucy to see if I could figure out, based on conversations with her, whether or not she was being truthful in what she was saying and was reporting. Because as that thing kind of developed, her sister, Linda, created a Facebook
Counter
page,
narrative.
a counter narrative saying that Lucy was a fucking compulsive liar and that she was doing this as a money grab. So I'm like, wow, this thing is insane. So I come up with the idea. I'm like, look, I tell Allie, I said, I want you to call Lucy, based on this article, and tell her, look, I'm an attorney, albeit from Illinois, but I just wanted to let you know. Well, do you remember what you told her on the message? Because she ended up calling you back.
I don't remember, but I know that, after you spoke with her, you 100% believed that at least she wholeheartedly believed this was
Right.
true and that her memories were real and that she was being genuine. And you really worked hard to try and uncover these bodies and, give all these
Well,
victims some
don't even get to
peace.
that part of it. So yeah, because that's the part of the story. So I had I'm boots on the ground with this thing. So after I start, so Allie makes it happen. Is that part of the story? Allie, of course, makes it happen because that's what she does. She makes shit happen. She's able to get her to call Allie back by just kind of leaving like a little tidbit, a tasty tidbit that she knew would draw her into calling her. And she's like, look, something to the effect of, if you were at all concerned about criminal liability because you have claimed to have helped your father dispose of these bodies when you were a child and you wanted to ask a criminal defense attorney a question, I'm here for you. So something to that effect. So Allie calls and she texts me. She calls Allie back and Allie's out of the house. And Allie texts me. She's like, Lucy called me back, like exclamation points on this text. I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, where are you? She's like, I'm almost home. So she comes in. Of course, Allie's on the phone. She's talking to Lucy, and I'm like lurking around. And I'm like, what? I'm like, let her. I want to talk to her. So Allie like transitions it. She's like, well, like my husband, who's also an attorney, would like to talk to you. Would you be up for that? So I start talking to her, and over the next like few weeks, I have many like lengthy hours long conversations with Lucy. And like Allie says, I come to the conclusion that at the very least, Lucy believes that what she is saying is true, which could be different than the fact that it is true. But in Lucy's mind, what she's saying, because I'm sitting there throughout all these conversations trying to pick up on little inconsistencies, little red flags where I'm like, yeah, there's one. There's that puts me off. Like I'm like, so because remember, I have this counter narrative from her sister that's happening in real time over here. So ultimately, I'd say 8 months goes by, and I've been talking to Lucy for this entire period of time. And at that point, she's like, I only trust two people. I trust the reporters from People, and I trust you. And I'm not talking to anybody else about this thing. I said, well, that's good. I said, I would hope that you would trust me. I would hope that I've built that with you over this period of time. And so I think a few days after that particular conversation, she calls me up and she says, they're digging. And the part of the story that was really interesting is that the wells that she remembers were not on her father, Don Studi's property, but they were located on the adjoining property, which was owned by Sean and Tracy Smith. And so I reach out to the Smiths, okay? And I'm like, I'm a down to earth guy. I'm able to kind of connect with Sean in a way that he's like, all right, this guy's not some kind of scumbag. And I'm like, I'm going to be heading down. Like I'm going to come because we got confirmation that they saw this caravan of what looked like to be fed vehicles with heavy equipment all coming to the properties. And so I get down there and I am doing in real time on TikTok reporting on it. So I'm down there in real time. I'm like the night that I got down, it was a 6-hour drive for me. I'm on my TikTok when I get down to the property and I'm driving down this back road. It's the middle of the fucking night. It's pitch black. And I'm out there and I see Sean's fence. So Lucy has kind of guided me to where this back way past the cemetery is, to where you can access the property. And I'm standing there on my TikTok doing a live. And I'm like, well, you're like, I'm certainly not going to trespass. Like I'm doing a live. I'm not going to commit a crime here on a live TikTok. So, I'm going to come back in the morning. So the following morning, and I found an Airbnb, or actually Allie found me an Airbnb that was probably about 15 minutes away. It was like actually a room in somebody's house, real nice woman. And it was like some kind of old timey, like
Bed and breakfast kind of scenario.
yeah. But like, what are the boarding house? It felt like a boarding house is what it felt like. So I go up to the room and, I set all my shit up, and then I'm like, all right, the next morning I get up bright and early. I'm up at like 6:30, go take a shower, and I'm out there. So I drive down. Now, the rental car that I had rented, and this was just by complete happenstance, happened to be, I think it was a white Chevy Caprice, right? So like I didn't ask for it. I wasn't trying to make it seem like it looked like an unmarked cop car, but a lot of cops drive like
How Gacy of you.
Super Gacy-esque, right? So I'm pulling down. And they have at that same area that I was at the night before. And there's a point to this entire story that relates back to Gacy. Trust me. So I'm driving down this long driveway again, and I make it down and I see a cop. He's kind of sitting there and he's got a clipboard. And he's, he sees me. I've got like my Ray-Bans on. I think I'm wearing like a navy blue cap. And I stop and I roll down the window. He's like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, I'm good, man. How you? He's like, all right, yeah, go on in. I'm like, okay. So I drive down and I'm like, and that was it. Like I'm thinking, okay, maybe the car and like just kind of the way that I look, the guy thinks I'm law enforcement. So I go down, I park, and I'm sitting there for like 10 minutes. I see the heavy machinery, like they have a bulldozer in there. They have like a crane, like with the bulldozer with the bucket, so there's heavy equipment. They're planning on doing some heavy duty digging. And so I end up sitting there for about 10 minutes, and then a sheriff walks by to my window, and I roll it down. I'm like, how you doing? He's like, what? It's like, what the fuck are you doing down here? He's like, I see your TikToks. I've seen your TikToks. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm not trying to hide them. They're public, obviously. I'm like, well, thank you for watching my content. He's like, what are you doing? You are not allowed to be down here. He's like, get out of the car. So I'm like thinking this guy's going to arrest me. Like honestly, I'm like, okay, like I'm in trouble for something, even though this is public land where so I'm like, okay. So he's like, wait here. And he goes, and I see him, and he's yelling at somebody. I think he might be yelling at the guy with the clipboard. And he comes back and he's like, give me your ID. I'm like, I give him my ID. He's writing my shit down. I'm like, he's like, we got our eyes on you. He's like, you need to leave here right now. Do not come back. And I'm like, look, I said, I am not here to try to foil whatever you guys are doing. I am merely a set of eyes, because Lucy is of the mindset that you guys aren't going to actually dig, that this is just like all pro forma, that you're coming out here just for appearance sake, and that you're not going to dig, or if you are going to dig, that you're going to dig in the wrong place, and that you're going to end up not finding what she is claiming is true, which is tons of bodies that were dropped in these wells. So I'm like, and that's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing. So in the interim, there's a person that is renting a trailer on what used to be Don Studi, who is now deceased, on his particular property. So that guy Lucy was able to get in contact with. And then I said, well, can you ask him if you can give me his number so I can text him? I text him. I'm like, hey, I do this podcast thing, man. And, you know, I wanted to see if I could talk to you. I wanted to see if I'd be able to camp out on your side of the property so that I could observe what they're doing in terms of on the Smith's land, because they're not going to let me come on and observe it. And so I go and I talk to him, real nice guy. His name was Patrick. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, that's fine. You know, so I end up that morning, I climb up, and again, this isn't a hollow, like what you're talking
climbing.
about. Oh, I'm fucking climbing.
You're
like
climbing.
Literally up the side of like this, because it was the only way up. So I'm climbing up the side of this, like this craggy cliff, but it's all kind of soft mud that's been, because it's like in a hollow. Like hollows are typically like in Tennessee, like they call them a holler. I live down in the holler, you know. So like it's weird to have a hollow in Iowa. So I end up getting up to this one portion, and I can see all these different areas where there were pink bows tied to different tree branches. And I'm on the phone with Lucy. I have a shit signal back there. She's like, oh, those are where the dogs marked back on the Studi property, like the cadaver dogs. So like, so I see like 8 of these things. And I'm like, I don't know if I called you. I'm like, should I go buy a fucking shovel? Just see if I should start digging, you know, because I'm like, they can't stop me from doing anything over here. I'm like, if I find a bone, I'll let. I'm like, hey, I found a bone. You know, it's like, so I'm like standing on the fence line, watching them. I don't dig. I don't go buy a shovel because I don't want to like get, you know, just create a big stir. So I'm standing there, and then ultimately I start following the fence line. So there's a fence line that separates the 2 properties, because obviously the Smiths had cattle, and a lot of cows, you know, had been on that property. And so the fence line goes all the way up. I get up onto this huge landing, and there's another entrance up there. Okay. And I see that there's another sheriff standing there, or a deputy sheriff, really nice guy. And I'm sitting there, just saying, I tell him who I am, and he's like, yeah. He's like, I watch your TikTok. I think you put some good content out there. I'm like, thanks, man. The whole TikTok thing, watching that kind of develop in real time, where I went from, I think, 1,000 followers to like 75,000 followers, like overnight, because it was like this real time thing that I was doing. And like everybody in that town was watching it. I'd be walking around. They're like, oh, there's a TikTok guy. Like the mayor invited me to his house for dinner. It was insane, the whole thing. So at any rate, I'm having this conversation, but the most poignant part of it in this particular visit was this conversation that I had with this particular deputy sheriff. And so probably about 40 minutes into the conversation, I mentioned the fact that, you know, I had done this John Wayne Gacy podcast, and my dad was his lawyer. And he's like, oh, he's like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I should listen to that. I'm like, I think you'd like it, man. I think you'd really like it. He's like, oh, you know, that's so funny. He's like, you know, Gacy's first victim. I'm like, Tim McCoy? He's like, yeah, Tim McCoy. He's like, he grew up right here in Green Hollow. Like my fucking, like my face, like my whole face went like I was like, what? I was like, really? I'm like, he grew up like here? He's like, yeah. He's like, not only that, I think that he's related to Lucy Studi. And I'm like sitting there, I'm like, my fucking mind is blown. Like, this is one of those things where I'm having to pick up my skull bones and put them back. I'm like, what? I'm like, you're telling me that John Wayne Gacy's first victim, Tim McCoy, who obviously after having done the podcast, I know a huge amount about, but don't know that, is somehow related to Lucy Studi. He's like, I think they're cousins and not even that distance. So I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, so like all of a sudden I get this, like it's like the second or third time in my life where I feel like that I'm doing something that fate had placed me in the position that I'm in now to be doing what I'm doing now, because it's just way too fucking weird and way too coincidental. So I'm just, and I'm down there for another couple of days until they conduct the dig, and they claim that they didn't find shit. And I'm like driving back, and like, but
Meanwhile, Lucy's calling me. They're in the wrong spot. Tell
Yeah.
Bob they're in the wrong spot.
and I'm like, so I get on the phone with Lucy, and I can't remember if it was that night. I'm like, are you? And this is like, she knows that my father defended Gacy. She knows that I did this podcast, that I said, you should really listen to this, because I think that it'll give you some insight on who I am and what I do and how I operate. I'm like, I think that it's that type of podcast. You're going to get to know me through the course of this pod. She's like, I can't do it. I just can't do serial killers. I'm like, it's not really about the serial killers. Yes, you hear Gacy, but you can fast forward through the tapes. It's really about everything else. It's about the victims, the investigate, all that stuff. She's like, she's like, I know. I haven't been able to do it. I'm like, okay, but but you know that I've done this podcast. You knew that my father was his lawyer. How could you not mention to me that Tim McCoy, his first victim, was somehow related to you? And she's like, oh. She's like, oh, yeah. She's like, yeah, he was like my second cousin. And she starts telling me the story of like when he went missing. And I'm like, Lucy. I'm like, what? I'm like, so that whole thing just blew my mind. There was like obviously a whole.
And then Bob's got that, squirrely sense that he can sense a serial killer in a room. You might have been a serial hunter in another life.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Serial killer hunter.
Yeah, serial killer hunter. So yeah, that was an incredible. I don't know if you want to call it. I don't know if you want to call it a coinky dink. I don't know what you want to call it. It was just so weird. It was just so weird. Yeah.
So my question is, should we officially end the podcast portion of this episode and get to the stickers, or just there's only a couple, do the stickers and let Darren figure it out?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll officially end it here, I guess, and then we'll do the supers. There's not that many. There's only like a few. All right. So this has been episode 3 of our listening parties for Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy Investigation, and our Q&A from my beautiful wife. And hopefully we answered some of your questions as we went along. And keep looking forward to these, because we will continue to do them. I think I've twisted Allie's arm enough to where she's going to allow me to do it. I mean, she is the boss. Let's be clear about that. So, but I think I've been able to convince her that this is a good move for us and for the pod. So we thank you for being with us. I will be sure to let you guys know via social media when the next one's going to happen. And I want you guys to remember, without you, I'll just be an old man.
Talking about an old case.
Got that right. All right. So cut that. All right. So thank you.
So we got Julie Jensen. She said, I listened to this episode. My mind was blown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks,
So was mine when I was writing it. I was like, so upset. Like, and you can hear it in there when I say Rob Peace's name. You can hear I had started to cry. And I did. I was crying at the end of it. It was very, like, when I was reading through their names, it was so powerful for me in terms of like because I felt it. Like what I was saying was the truth. And it was like, you can hear it. If you go back and listen to it, like Darren cut it off, like, right. You can hear me losing it. It's like one of those things where, like, if you ever listen to our Valo coverage, like the episode that we did about Lori when she was talking to her son on that phone call, and like I just could not stop crying. It was like I couldn't, like, we were trying to record this thing and I kept apologizing to Allison. I'm like, I just can't gather myself. It's like, it was so, like, obviously I felt a connection to it in terms of my relationship with my mom at the time. So it just impacted me so profoundly. But it was like like this episode in particular. Yeah, I had a lot of feels when I was.
I had a lot of feels listening to it as well.
Yeah.
So Fluffy Unicorn 83 says, "We love you, Allie. Hope everything goes smoothly." And I did see a lot of your comments there, um, telling me that you're thinking of me and wishing me luck. So I appreciate all of you very, very much for that. It's very, very heartwarming. Bananas Luggy 27, member for 7 months. Thank
Banana
you.
sluggy.
Oh, Banana Sluggy. Thank you for continued support. I don't know.
You're so adorable.
You read it.
We thank you. Holy bananas. 10 months. Greatest chat in the land.
And
Damn,
that's
you damn
Kai,
right. That is
234.
a ride or die ma. We love you. We love you so much, Kai. And it is, in fact, the greatest chat, greatest community in all of YouTube. I will die on that hill.
By the way, guys, I realized that you can change your screen name in YouTube. Like that's how I changed mine to. Well, right now when we're on lives, I'm in Defense Diaries, so I come up as Defense Diaries, but changed mine to Alley of Defense Diaries. It's not it's not the profile name you change, it's like under there. So I don't know. I think you guys could all change your names back to whatever the heck you want them to be. But
Yeah, but it's weird. It seems like people are saying that when they come to our channel that somehow
well,
is that what you guys are saying? Like I thought I read a couple of comments where people were saying when you get to our channel that YouTube's changing your fucking screen name. Is that true? Like
all right,
or
I'm gonna try to make a comment as me from my phone. But meanwhile, read Pokemom's.
okay, Pokey, we love you so much. Member for 21 months. OG. Made me check, Kai. Love my DD family. We love you back, Pokey, and we're eternally grateful for your constant presence here as one of our mods and one of our ride or dies. We love you.
I mean, there's mine.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't think people are lying about it.
Right. No, so people are saying it's other channels too.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. It's the tubes is glitching. Military Mama, thank you very much for your generosity. Thank you for everything you do, Bob and Allie. It always makes my day to see a new DD live. Thanks for your service to all the veterans out there. Tomorrow is a day that is very, very important to me. My father was a veteran. My grandfather was a veteran. Allie's grandfathers were both veterans.
So we should say Happy Veterans Day today since we won't be here tomorrow.
Yes, happy Veterans Day. And thank you. Thank you for any veterans out there, past or present, for your service to our country. We wouldn't be here without you guys. And the amount of bravery and courage that it takes to do what you do is unparalleled. So I am eternally grateful to all of you that have served. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And we mean that with all of our hearts. And thanks for pointing that out, Military Mama. Okay, Robbins, I answered. And then Under Your Scars, 7181, loving the podcast, very professional and super interesting. Appreciate you both. Thank you, Under Your Scars. We appreciate that generosity and the comment, both. I am, and, well, you make sure to let him know that we love him. Seriously. And that we hope that he is safe above all else. Truly, because these are scary times out there in this world. Yes, my father is a veteran. Yes, correct. Yes, he is. That is correct. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. He is still alive and well, my dad. I keep having to tell people that. They're like, oh, because I think sometimes people think that my father is passed, but he's not.
Yeah, because they never see him.
But
it's in the talks. It was supposed to be. He's trying to get some pain relief for his back, so now it might take a little bit longer.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here with us. Thank you for listening with us. If you aren't following on Buried Inside the John Wayne Gacy investigation on wherever you get your podcasts, please, please, please do that. Also, follow Defense Diaries podcast if you're not doing that. And you can check out season 2, which is about the Anthony Garcia case out
in
of
which I
Nebraska.
promise I'm going to finish. It's 68 episodes. It's
Right, so by the
68
time you catch up, he'll be done.
maybe. People binge like crazy. Yeah,
That's a lot of binging.
I've
That's a
got
lot of
like the
binging.
last 6 episodes. That's it. That's all it is. Like 6. I just need to knock it out.
Yes, and thank you, mods, for all of your help. Thank you,
We
Mandy
love
and
you.
Tracy.
We love you. We love you. Please make sure that you like, share, and subscribe before you leave this one, especially on these. Like, if you guys, we really need people to be liking it. We also need comments in the algo if you're a replay crew, because it really helps get it out there. I just feel like these things as a companion piece to the podcast are pretty awesome. And we're only getting like 4,500 views on them. I just think, and it's, if YouTube's not putting it in people's feeds, like if it's not dropping when you're scrolling, then only the people that are here and the people that are in our community know about it existing. So again, you guys are so critical to us growing the show, and we're so close to passing 60. If you love us, let people know. That's what the share part is about. So like, share, subscribe. If you really love us, we absolutely adore our members. Think about becoming a member or a Patreon patron, because both of those are very, very helpful to us. They help us keep the lights on. They help us keep creating. And frankly, money that you guys donate during these lives goes directly towards us traveling. I need, I need to be doing on the boots, man
Boots
on
on
the
the ground.
street. Yeah, what did I say? Man on the boots.
That's something.
Some shit that wasn't right. Yeah, boots on the ground down in both Indiana and more importantly in Arkansas on Aaron Spencer's case. I want to get out there. I want to talk to the people. I want to put content out there. I want to get that case out there to the public because I'm very, very passionate about that case. So just so you know, the money goes for good causes. It truly does. We use it for all those things. So we're always grateful for it. And again, we couldn't do it without y'all. All right, you guys. And to you guys, you beautiful, beautiful human beings who we love so very much. Just remember this always. Without you guys, I'd just be an old man
Sitting around talking to his wife.
and hoping she gets through her surgery just fine tomorrow, because I love her so much.
Oh,
Bye.
love you, babe.